Yeah, hello. I'm Nick Mole from the Pesticide Action Network UK. We are a Brighton-based charity and the only charity in the UK that works specifically on all the issues related to pesticides. When I talk about pesticides, what I'm talking about is poisons that are released into the environment to kill things. And under that umbrella of pesticides come insecticides, which kill insects, herbicides, which can kill plants, fungicides, which kill fungus, etc., etc. So these are released into the environment, and their main use is in agriculture. And unfortunately, they don't restrict themselves just to dealing with whatever has been deemed to be a pest or a problematic issue. So they won't just kill the plant or the insect that is causing problems. They also have impacts on non-target species and the environment more widely. And some of these have been quite dramatic. The first warning signs were given in a book called Silent Spring that was written by Rachel Carson and published in 1962. And I would encourage you all to read that or have a look at it, at least look at extracts of it. It's the book that started the green movement. It's the book that first started warning against the dangers of introducing chemicals into our environment. And in the book, Rachel Carson posited that if we carried on using pesticides, we would kill all the insects, as a result, kill all the birds, and wake up to a silent spring with no bird song. Unfortunately, 60 years later, we are in the midst of that silent spring. We're in the midst of a biodiversity crisis, and pesticide use has played a significant role in getting us to where we are now. A few examples of what pesticides have done in the UK specifically. Since the 1970s, the number of farmland bird species has halved. So we've lost 50% of our farmland bird species. We've lost 95% of our wildflower meadows. A lot of that is to do with land use changes and changes in the way we farm, but pesticides have allowed those changes in the way we farm to happen. We've seen massive decreases in insect abundance. We've seen massive decreases in wildflower abundance, and these are all impacting heavily on wider biodiversity. If there are no flowers for the insects to feed on, there are no insects for the birds to feed on. If there are no birds, there are less for the mammals to feed on, and it works all the way up the chain. So we have pesticides in our rivers, affecting and harming aquatic ecosystems. We have pesticides in our soils, and we have pesticides in ourselves as well. Even pesticides that haven't been used for 30 years are still in our bodies. They're in our environment. They're persistent, they're mobile, and they move around, and they're harmful. They don't just harm biodiversity or the environment. As I said, pesticides are poisons, and many of them are linked to both short-term and long-term health problems, including cancers, endocrine disruptions, the way your body develops, leading to sort of long-term health problems, but also short-term ones as well. Now, the Pesticide Action Network, we work across all areas of pesticides use. So the main use of pesticides is in agriculture. It's used to grow our food. And about 90% of all the pesticides used in the UK are actually used in farmland. The remaining sort of 5 to 10% are used in our towns and cities, parks, playgrounds, schools, etc. So whilst there is some general agreement that pesticides are a useful thing for growing food, there is absolutely no justification for using them in our towns and cities, particularly when you consider the amount of people who might be exposed to pesticides in those areas. And of particular concern is the impact of pesticides and the effect they can have on children, young people whose bodies are still developing and growing, who are potentially more exposed to pesticides via both diet and in their environment. So we're really concerned about that. For the last 7, 8 years, we've been running a pesticide-free towns campaign across the UK. The idea was started by looking at France, where at the time 400 towns, cities, villages across France had completely stopped using pesticides because they believed that was the right thing to do for their citizens. They believed that was the right thing to do for the surrounding environments, and they thought it was possible, and it was possible. And in fact, France has subsequently brought in legislation and laws that have banned the use of all non-agricultural pesticides. So every single town, city, village in France managed without the use of pesticides. Similarly, in Belgium, Luxembourg, Denmark, the Netherlands, all or a vast majority of the urban spaces where people live are managed without the use of pesticides. So it is perfectly possible. So when we started our campaign, the idea was to motivate local communities, the residents, give them the information that they needed to launch their own campaigns, and encourage them to contact and tackle their council and say, we want to do something different. We don't want these poisons sprayed in our streets. We don't want these poisons sprayed in our schools. We don't want these poisons sprayed in our parks. And at first, it was an uphill struggle. Councils weren't really interested. Um, but things have changed. So we've got now about 150 local campaigns all around the UK. And so far we've got about 100 councils from parish council, so very small, right up to county council level who have either stopped using pesticides or have massively reduced their use of pesticides or are actively seeking alternatives so that they can reduce further their use of pesticides. And what has also changed is that councils are now coming directly to us for information. So that's really encouraging. Um, so one of the areas that is most problematic is the use in schools. And to that end, we have recently published a new report or a new briefing document on how you can end the use of pesticides, which is mainly herbicides like glyphosate, which you may well have heard of because of a controversy about the health impacts of it and its impact on the environment. So we've produced a guide for schools to develop a policy for removing the use of herbicides in their grounds, in their properties, and therefore eliminating exposure to these harmful chemicals. It's very simple. I mean, it really ending the use of pesticides is not it's not rocket science. It's really just having a mindset and a change in mindset, a way of doing things differently. And there are huge benefits to doing it. One, obviously, as I keep mentioning, is the potential health impact. So you're not going to be breathing in pesticides, you're not going to be coming into contact with them. But the other one is for biodiversity. So I'd already mentioned the impact of pesticides on biodiversity in general. So the declining bird populations, declining insect, declining wild plant species. And our towns and cities can become havens for biodiversity, where it's much harder to perhaps replace it in the countryside. And part of going pesticide free is very much about encouraging and increasing biodiversity. And as a part of your strategy, that's exactly what you want to be doing. So if there are areas in your school that are currently either mowed or made to look neat and tidy just for no particular reason other than that's the way it's already been done, well, these can be turned into havens for wildlife. We've seen in some of the towns that have gone pesticide free, endangered plant species suddenly popping up on the pavements after one season of not spraying with herbicides. And this has got benefits for it's got benefits for the plants themselves, it's got benefits to the insects that feed off them. And also the general public are quite amazed. They're seeing things they've never seen before, growing on the streets of Brixton, for example. So your school can become a haven for wildlife. And frankly, we're in the midst of a biodiversity and climate crisis, and every little thing that we can do to help reverse that, to help stop that, to help support and bolster biodiversity wherever we can will be beneficial. So that's our schools campaign. And, sometimes it gets quite frustrating and a little bit uh, depressing thinking about the state we're in. But I think our pesticide-free towns campaign and what can be done and achieved in schools is quite positive. It shows that actually people can make a difference when they want to. And no difference is too small. It's all really important to do. And in terms of pesticides, we will carry on trying to get changes in agriculture so that the food we eat is not grown with harmful pesticides, so that we farm more sustainably with nature in mind, looking for nature-based solutions to deal with pest and weed problems, etc. And also so the food that we eat is not covered in pesticide residues, which it is. Um, and that's really all I want to say about this at the moment. There is lots and lots of information about every aspect of pesticide use available on our website, and I would encourage you to go and have a delve into all of that, not just to see the problems, but also to see the solutions that you can also be a part of.